Congress doesn't always get the last word. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I want to explain an important nuance in U.S. code that can often lead to important miscommunications. Now, before I get into this, I want to remind you of the layers in the hierarchy of federal documents. And regardless where you work, this hierarchy looms over you. Way at the top, you've got U.S. code, and this is the formal compilation and codification of federal statutes. The idea of this codification is to make finding relevant laws easier by organizing them by subject matter. This code is maintained by the Office of Legal Revision Counsel in the House of Representatives. You can find alternative sites that post the U.S. code, but as far as I'm concerned, the official site is the best site. Underneath the U.S. code layer, you have public law, and these are laws that have been enacted by Congress. And you can search for these laws using congress.gov. These are laws that may eventually get codified into U.S. code, or sort of like the annual laws that get passed, like the Appropriation Acts. Beneath the congressional documents, you have the presidential documents, executive orders and proclamations, and a couple other types. These are essentially how the executive branch fills in the gaps that Congress leaves in the law. Just below the presidential documents, there's at least two federal agencies that set policy for the entire federal workforce. These are the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. There are some smaller agencies that set policy across the whole executive branch, but I don't have much experience with those. Underneath this are the departments: Department of Defense, Education, Interior, Agriculture, etc. The Department of Defense has a website where they've got directives and instructions and memorandums that tell the services what to do. And then each of the services have their own library that includes regulations and policies and orders and pamphlets. The important thing about these layers is that no matter what piece of the bureaucratic puzzle you're working on, it doesn't solely exist within one layer. It's stacked across all layers, and you have to develop the skill to integrate information that's coming from Congress and the President and the Secretary of Defense and your service secretary. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there is an unusual construct in U.S. code that can cause confusion. In some cases, Congress will issue guidance that takes effect only if the executive branch doesn't issue its own guidance. It's kind of like higher headquarters telling you how to do something if you don't already have a way to do it. Let me give you an example. You've probably heard that the reserve components drill 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year. This amount of training is like bedrock for the reserve components, and most people will point to Title 10, Section 10-147 as the basis for this guidance. But look at how this piece of U.S. code actually starts. Except as specifically provided in regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Defense. What that means is there's a Department of Defense instruction, DOTI 1215-06, that actually directs a lower level of training than what's laid out in U.S. code. Now, before any of you reserve people start freaking out, the DOTI supports that same level of training 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. It just shrinks the population of people who have to do that much training. U.S. code has the entire ready reserve performing that much training. But the DOTI doesn't require people in the individual ready reserve to perform this level of training. Quackers, huh? I mean, you really have to know your way up and down this guidance to be able to puzzle out what the correct guidance is. Congress makes that vague hand wave at regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Defense, but they don't tell you how to find the regulation that applies. And this delegation of decision-making can be even more difficult to parse out. Check out this passage in Title 10, Section 2222, paragraph G2. Congress is trying to lay out who within the Department of Defense is responsible for certifying defense business systems. Paragraph A, you got words. Paragraph B, more words and a couple of subparagraphs. Then you get to paragraph C, and it says, such official other than the applicable official under subparagraph A and B as the Secretary designates. You want to have some fun? Try to track down who the Secretary designates. That'll take some time. There are even cases where U.S. Code cites subordinate documents. Check out Section 194 of Title 10. In paragraph F, Congress adopts not just a definition. I mean, they could have just copy and pasted it, but they cite the specific regulation. And to me, this is really weird because the Department of Defense could just reissue that document and completely change the meaning of the law. All right, so what? I mean, I got it. Ain't nothing easy. Well, aside from the fact that you want to run these details to ground, you also want to watch out that other people don't railroad your leaders simply by citing U.S. Code. When someone invokes U.S. Code as a justification for spending money or doing something, stop and read the code. And when you see these strange little references to other policies, dig into it, or better yet, make the other guy lay it out. Because I'll tell you, if you just assume that U.S. Code takes precedence because it is U.S. Code, you're going to find yourself on the losing end of some arguments. And at the end of the day, I want you to be as successful as you possibly can be. So watch this video to learn more.